Welcome to Around Kansas. I'm Deb Goodrich.
And I'm Michelle Martin.
And since it's the 1st of November, it is election season. And of course, we don't have a presidential election going on this year, but lots of off year elections happening around the country, whether that's states or localities. And nobody has an election history comparable to that of Kansas. And right behind me, this is an image of the arrest of Governor Robinson for treason. Um, and that's one of the things I want to talk about today is some of the colorful characters that Kansas has elected over the years. And Michelle, what have you got there? It looks like the Inquisition.
Well, it could be. Actually, this is a representation of a speech that was given by Olympia Brown in Kansas in 1867. And Olympia Brown and Susan B. Anthony and several other prominent women in the suffrage movement spent a great deal of time and money in Kansas in 1867 touring the state, stumping for women's suffrage, but also suffrage for African American men as well. So, this is from one of their suffrage events in 1867.
While they were making that trek through Kansas, they stayed with the Richies in Topeka, John and Mary
Hmm.
Jane Ritchie. And they asked Mary Jane to introduce them, and Mrs. Ritchie declined and said that her husband should do it. And I've often wondered if Mary Jane was just shy or if she thought they would have more credibility if a prominent man such as Mr. Ritchie introduced them. Never really knew what her reasoning was, but they were guests of the Ritchies, and so one of my um, favorite stories about that family and how they were connected to everything that happened in the territory and early statehood.
Hmm. Well, and Susan B. Anthony, her brother Daniel actually lived in Fort Scott. And so when Susan arrived in Kansas in 1867, one of the first places she traveled to was Fort Scott to visit her brother and spent some time with him before she began that really extensive tour of Kansas. It was really a whistle stop tour. They were going by train and by stagecoaches of different kinds and crisscrossing the state, going from event to event, speaking, stumping for women's suffrage. But they also were talking about other issues like temperance and education and other things that were important to not just women, but to all Kansans. And I think that's the important thing about elections is how elections in Kansas history from its territorial period even up to today, um, things that are voted on are important to everyone.
The Anthonys, of course, have a legacy of newspaper um, uh, stewardship in Kansas.
Hmm.
BR and his son Dan Anthony and Leavenworth, and it's very interesting. They're great resources for materials. Like when I'm researching Charles Curtis, um, the younger Anthony, which would be Susan B. Anthony's nephew, takes over as publisher of the newspaper. And at one point, but that doesn't stop him from being politically active. You had almost like what we've come to today. The newspapers were representative many times of one political party or the other. And so you had in Kansas, though, um, as oh gosh, one of our historian buddies has talked about, you have a strong one party system, but that party is often divided. And of course, that's been dominated by Republicans from early on, from the radical Republicans of early
Hmm.
statehood and on. But that party was often divided, and that's how the other party would get in office sometimes. And that trend is really never abated. It's still like
No.
that very much. So those newspapers would take on support of one candidate or another, and supported political um, agendas, and so it's really interesting to see the Anthonys, who were never tactful in their expressing their opinions. They were always it's extremely opinionated and really important family in Kansas politics.
Well, you make a really great point, Deb, that I think folks maybe forget about is that our newspapers in the 19th century, especially the territorial period, were huge drivers for elections. The newspapers really were providing not just news, but also news and gossip and what we would also call quote unquote fake news. And that, they weren't doing a great deal of fact checking. Anything that came in got printed. And so you can see that in the territorial newspapers in the run up to the various elections, and you can tell the political leanings of the
Oh yeah,
newspapers very quickly by
yeah.
what they do and do not cover in the news. And so it's real fascinating. And that's why I say in Kansas in the territorial period, you really have to use those newspapers. You have to take them with a grain of salt, and you have to kind of distill down the facts from all of the hyperbole that is in them. But boy, do they make for great reading. Actually, Craig Miner, who was at Wichita State University, gosh, Craig, who left us far too soon, did a fantastic book on the role of Kansas
Mhm.
newspapers in the political climate and culture. And wow, I mean, you read that and you get a whole new appreciation for what poor election officials had to face in the 19th century as the newspapers were inflaming people's passions and then they were showing up to the ballot box. Whew.
Well, it's a fascinating history, and Kansas is one of the few states where people moved to this state in order to cast their votes. They
Mhm.
wanted to, of course, swing statehood one way or the other, whether it would be a pro-slavery state or an abolitionist state. And so people moved here for that purpose, just to vote. And I don't think there's another state that has that kind of background. So that's always fascinated me. We're one of the few states that celebrates the day of its statehood, Kansas Day. I grew up, of course, in one of the original 13 colonies. Nobody knew when they became states. Nobody. I,
Mhm.
I still couldn't tell you. But in Kansas, statehood was a huge deal. And of course, statehood came for Kansas as the country was falling apart. So those early years of Kansas elections are some of the most colorful stories ever. And of course, one of my favorite stories is one of those early elections when they're electing territorial representatives to Congress. There are more than double the number of eligible votes cast. So you've got like 3,000 eligible voters in the territory. You've got 6,000 votes cast. And it goes back to that age old question that we're still grappling with today: who can vote? Who is eligible to vote?
Yeah.
Who is a resident? And we did a fantastic thing with kids voting one time. It's one of the best exercises I've ever done, where I had 100 sixth grade boys. They were all Boy Scouts, audience from hell, and passed out these little slips of paper with their identity. You're a 20-year-old white woman. You're a 35-year-old black man who owns property. You're a 40-year-old Native American man. You're blah, 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 but all these different identities. And we go through elections, in the years and like who can vote. And so the first election, we're electing a U.S. senator, and I show my ignorance now. I can't remember the year, maybe 1876 or something. And I said, who's going to vote? And all the white male property owners are jumping up and down, and they're certain they can vote. And I said, nope, sorry, the state legislature elected the senator, so none of you can vote. And one of the kids said, well, my daddy's in the state house. Can he vote? So his daddy was there, and his daddy elected the senator that night.
There you
So
go.
we just kept on going. And I'm telling you what, by the end of the evening, the natives were restless. The natives were unhappy because they were the last ones to get to vote. And they're like, "This isn't fair. This isn't fair." They were just jumping up and down, and I'm like,
Mhm.
"By golly, that's right. It's not fair." So it's Kansas, though, is the perfect microcosm of all of these issues. Like you were just talking with women's suffrage and suffrage for minorities, and it's just the perfect microcosm to examine prohibition and all those issues that
Mhm.
influence elections.
Deb, it's interesting. I think it's really important for folks who have forgotten that point that Kansas, part of its existence, it's owed to this idea of um, you know, popular sovereignty, being able to come in and vote whether Kansas was going to be a free or a slave state. And I find it fascinating because as both of us as educators, as historians, as public historians, we encounter a lot of people who have their own ideas about what they think was going on in the past. And I find it fascinating that there tends to always be this perception that those who were Missourians or those folks who were coming from the South were coming in and had literally blood, that their blood was boiling, and they just had this idea about, we're going to take up arms and we're going to fight for that right to vote, and we're going to do everything by the force of arms if we have to. And all you have to do is look at the letters of Oxala J. Hoole, who came to Kansas Territory with his brand new bride, literally their honeymoon. They got married, and the next day they left and came to Kansas Territory to settle. And they settled in the community of Douglas, not far from Lecompton, right along the river. And in his letters back to his family, he writes and talks about his disgust and his disappointment with what are supposedly Southerners, which are really Missourians. And he says, "I came here to make this a slave state at the ballot box. I came here to do this with the ballot, not the Bowie knife." And he's so disappointed that it's gone the route of violence. And it's amazing to me that, when you tell his story, people go, "Wait a minute, that can't be true, because he's a Southerner. Didn't they all come here armed to the teeth?" And he said, "I never had to be armed to the teeth until I came here, because I didn't know if I was safe." What he said, "I felt I was in just as much danger from other Southerners, i.e.,
Mhm.
Missourians, as I was for free staters and anti-slavery advocates." So, voting in that early time period literally could be a life or death issue, and I
Yes.
think we forget just how tense and explosive it was. And like you say, um, we're turning in vote totals that are two, three, four times higher than the populace. All you have to do is, there's a fantastic engraving. It's called "Voting at Kickapoo," and you see the men coming in to vote, and you read the descriptions of voting where the men line up and vote, and then they leave and they go change hat and coat and come back and give another name and vote again. And some of them will go have their beards trimmed shorter, and they change their clothing and vote again. And then some go to a barber and actually get shaved totally and come back and vote again. And so it's a little ballot box stuffing going on. And we think today, "Oh my gosh, you can't get away with that." We have different safeguards in place, and you know, it's really amazing to think that they really could get away with that, just by changing their clothing and their chin whiskers, and keep getting back in line over and over and over again.
Vote early and often. So,
Exactly.
some of the more notable people that we've elected, when you start looking at, of course, our first two U.S. senators, you can't make these guys up. When you look at Sam Palm the Pious Pomeroy, and of course James Henry Lane, the grim chieftain.
Oh.
Um, Neither one of these guys, they're just like straight out of Dickens. They're just these
Hmm.
incredibly um, uh, colorful and complex personalities. And Jim Lane, of course, was noted as a stump speaker and was an incredibly motivational stump speaker. Um, he killed one man that we're aware of, which is very interesting to me because he was known by the Missourians as, bloodthirsty um, and he incited violence. There's no doubt about that. But the only man that I'm aware of that he actually killed was a next door neighbor over a land dispute, and the neighbor had plowed up his daughter's grave. And I don't know many men that wouldn't have shot the neighbor over that.
Yeah.
So he's just so colorful. And of course, he has the ear of Abraham Lincoln because he protects Lincoln with his frontier guard in the early
Mhm.
days of Lincoln's presidency when he was actually sneaking into Washington. It was those days before the Secret Service and the CIA and all that security. And Jim Lane rounded up the Kansans and bivouacked them in the East Room of the White House to protect the president. And he also was very instrumental in both of Lincoln's elections in getting him the nomination secured for him. So he was an important political ally and thus had Lincoln's ear. So, despite the fact that poor Charlie Robinson, back here being arrested at one time, was the governor of Kansas, it was Jim Lane who had all the power because he had access to the political appointments. And in the early days of statehood, it's all about being appointed marshal or postmaster or any
Mhm.
one of the umpteen jobs that the government has available in the new territory. So uh, so they're both in the same party. They're both Republicans, Robinson and Lane, but you've got a huge divide, and you're either a Lane man or a Robinson man, and there's not much in between, and certainly nothing on the other side.
Well, and you've got to know that, Robinson, when Lane becomes senator, Robinson is seething inside. There was no love lost between the two men, really. I think the Robinsons, including Sarah, they really felt that Lane was this kind of base, low form of a political animal and did not like his methods. And he was too bombastic and he was too divisive. And of course, Lane, on his part, felt that Robinson wasn't radical enough, that he wasn't forceful enough, that he wasn't as active as he should be. And so I think it's interesting. You've got this push and pull between these two men, and they've got to go ahead and they've got to be able to work together for the betterment of Kansas. And wow, what a difficult working relationship that had to have been between with the two of them. And it's amazing. Lane, for all of his power, the power that he had in the ear of the president, and how quickly, though, that power dissolves after the assassination of Lincoln.
Oh,
And,
it's
you
gone.
know, I mean,
It's
it's
gone.
gone instantly.
It's gone.
But not only that, the personal toll that power took on Lane. Um, I mean, when he comes back to Kansas, he actually attempts suicide. He's so distraught over the death of the president, and he feels personally responsible. And it's
In 1821, a trade route was opened from Missouri in the United States across prairies and mountains to Mexico. In 2021, we will mark 200 years of epic conflicts and grand adventures, larger-than-life personalities, and sweeping landscapes. Join us on an historic journey. The Santa Fe Trail lives on.
Find us on social media or santafetrail.org. Welcome to the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center, right here in my hometown of Oakley, Kansas. We're the front door of Western Kansas, located on 3 main highways, I-70, US 83, and US 40. And all those roads lead to history, beautiful scenery, and adventure, no matter which direction you go. We now have an IHOP. That brand that you've trusted up and down the road in all your travels is staffed with local folks, real people, just like you and me, and we're waiting on you to join us. So for fun, adventure, fuel up, fuel your body, and let's have some fun.
Welcome back. And this segment of wildlife was a very popular one. And because I've had a lot of people mention this recently, we're going to talk about the coachwhip snake. And neither one of us wanted a coachwhip snake behind us because they are scary. So we decided on these pretty fall pictures instead. This one is from Lisa Stupka Olson up around Atwood, Kansas. And I just love this. I think it's such a pretty picture. And you've got fall leaves too, Michelle.
Yes, I do. I took this in Oklahoma before I moved to New Mexico. And there were just a lot of beautiful fall leaves on the ground in the park. And I took the cell phone and voila, instant backdrop photo. And yeah, you will find no snake near me. Not gonna happen.
Well, when we first ran this segment, I got there was a lot of responses, and yeah, I'm scared of snakes, and I could go to therapy, but I really don't have any desire to. But I do understand how important they are in the ecosystem, and I do not advocate the willy-nilly killing of snakes. And so as long as they stay out of my path, I'm good. Jake was getting some stuff out of a trailer the other day and came across a really, really angry bull snake. And our friend Larry Eberly was there. And Larry got it and threw it out into the wheat field nearby. And Jake said you could still hear it hissing, even after they had thrown it out into the wheat field a good distance. You could still hear that bull snake. And honestly, if I just came across a bull snake in the trailer, I don't know if I'd have enough presence of mind to figure out if that was a rattlesnake or a bull snake. I don't believe I'd have the presence of mind to look that closely. But yeah, they are great at keeping the rodents away. They have their place in the whole circle of life. I just want that circle to be a little farther away from me. And folks, I realize that coachwhip snakes are much maligned, but I'm sorry, they really are scary. And everybody I know that has encountered one has said the same thing. And so you can feel free to express your opinions otherwise. And I'm not advocating doing away with the coach snakes either, but they're fascinating and they're really scary.
Well, all I'm going to say about this topic is on to the next one.
On to the next one.
It is the dreaded S word that comes with summer, snakes. While researching the topic, I was appalled at the different types of species who call Kansas home. I was also amazed when our neighbor, Shirla Williams, shared a photo of one I thought was a myth, now to find it lives in my neighborhood. The coachwhip snake is unique and has inspired many a tall tale. Its smooth scales and coloration, often a dark head fading to a tan tail, look like a braided whip, so much so that you might even stop to pick it up before realizing it is alive. It appears to stand up, raising its head high above the grass. It is one of the fastest snakes and is rumored to chase people and whip them to death with its tail. They are extremely fast-moving, moving at 4 miles per hour, though some sources say they can slither up to 15 miles per hour. As if the word slither isn't bad enough, to have the speed of slithering even measured in miles per hour is rather unnerving. The coachwhip is one of America's largest native species, ranging from 50 to 72 inches, but the largest on record was 102 inches long. 102 inches. That is over 8 feet long. The color can vary from black or red to yellow tan and even pink. Coachwhips are diurnal and actively hunt and eat lizards, small birds, and rodents. Coachwhips subdue prey by grasping and holding them with their jaws. They do not constrict. It hunts by smell and sight. Curious with good eyesight, it frequently hunts with its head raised above the ground and vegetation, and unlike most snakes, visually locks onto its prey before capture. The teeth are razor sharp, resulting in lacerations rather than the puncture wound inflicted by other snakes. Following capture, the snake swallows its prey alive. It has strong jaws with rows of small inward slanting teeth. It has sometimes been observed to beat its prey against the ground in an apparent effort to stun it prior to swallowing. Prey items include birds, large insects, lizards, other snakes, and small mammals. Characterized as an efficient hunter, it may lay in wait for its prey and can trail animals through chemical scent. They are rather nervous reptiles and flee at the first sign of being threatened. Sometimes they may flee in the same direction a person is running, leading to the supposedly mistaken belief that the coachwhip chases people down. It will sometimes vibrate the tip of its tail among the ground litter, making a sound suggestive of a rattlesnake. If trapped, it will aggressively defend itself, striking repeatedly and biting. So, we have a snake that can grow up to 8 feet long, travel upwards of 15 miles per hour, and has razor-sharp teeth. Our friend J.D. Perry said it is common along the Smoky Hill River. Officially, its habitat covers most of the state. I may be spending more time indoors this summer.
Howdy, I'm Seth Hayes, and welcome to my hometown, from then to now. Council Grove has a rich history, as deep as the prairie tallgrass. Spend the day visiting 25 historic sites, or explore the unique shops and restaurants, or mosey out of town along the Santa Fe Trail. You all visit my hometown, Council Grove, in the heart of the Flint Hills.
Okay, looks like it's time for our tour. Welcome to the Fort Wallace Museum. Here at the museum, you're going to find some really interesting stuff, like our replica stagecoach from the Butterfield Overland Dispatch. We've got facades from the fort buildings. We've got an 1870s flag. There's a plesiosaur that was discovered locally. We've got the Ray pump organ collection. We're a little bitty place with a great big story, and we'd love to have you.
Welcome back, and yes, 'tis the season. 'Tis the season at Lecompton in the Territorial Capitol Museum right behind me, where every year about this time, they have an incredible display of Christmas trees, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of trees from every era, with thousands of ornaments and thousands of hours that go into setting up this incredible display. So check out the Territorial Capitol Museum at Lecompton. Tell them Deb and Michelle sent you. And while you're in Lecompton, make sure to go over to the first Territorial Capitol. To the Constitution Hall. Oh my gosh, Michelle, I need to go somewhere to the Constitution Hall State Historic Site. I need to go to an institution. Yeah, not Constitution Hall, but an institution. So go over there, tell Tim that we said hello. Our good buddy Tim Russ is the site director and has been for a long, long time. Not quite since they had the meetings in there. I think it was a little after that
Yeah, a
Tim
little
joined them.
after.
And Paul Bonmeyer probably wasn't there while they were building the Territorial Capitol, but not long after. So tell Paul Bonmeyer that we sent you over and said hello too.
You know, Deb, this time of year, Lecompton does it up right. I mean, with the tree exhibit at the museum, you can go in and see that and really get in the spirit and see how the community comes together to rally around that. But you can also begin thinking about holiday gifting When you go to Lecompton to visit the museums, you can visit their gift shops. You can visit the antique store in Lecompton, the Bald Eagle Mercantile. You can visit Empty Nesters Winery and buy for the wine lovers on your list. Or if you're an expat like me, you can go online and visit Kansas Originals. Or you can stop at their two convenient locations off of I-70, one on the Turnpike near Topeka, and one at the Wilson exit off I-70, and go to their flagship store. And you can find all of these amazing locally made, handmade Kansas items for gift giving, because let's face it, how many times do we want to hear about our gifts being delayed due to supply chain issues? So shop Kansas, shop local, because shopping at Kansas Originals and in Lecompton at the museums and the small stores will help our local economies. So you can visit them online, Kansas Originals. They have some fantastic Kansas made items.
They're wonderful, really wonderful. And while you're on I-70, stop in for Christmas on the High Plains at WaKeeney. And
Hmm.
they have downtown decorated beautifully. The big tree that is in the intersection there by the courthouse can be seen from the interstate. So you'll know you're in the right place. And the Trego County Historical Society has a wonderful museum. And again, shop, buy a membership, give a gift membership, if you've got somebody in the area that would like that. But Margene and all the folks there do a beautiful job. They've just added on to that museum, got a gorgeous mural inside that tells the story of the county's history in one colorful nutshell. And I've spoken there and had a chance to be part of several events, and they just do a marvelous job. Like, so many of these small communities. And like Michelle said, you don't have to worry about the supply chain when you're buying things locally. And let's face it, memberships, they will fit anywhere. They are the ultimate portable gift. They will go with you anywhere you go, and you're supporting a good cause and encouraging people, encouraging, the grandkids, get them memberships so that they start getting these newsletters and learning about history, and get them in the door free a time or two, and they can do some exploring. My kids, I'm so proud. Mr. Tiny, who just turned 3, his favorite place to go, the museum. So I am so proud of him.
That's right. And, for expats like me, I've got memberships of Fort Wallace, the Guardians, Bartlesville Area History Museum, Kansas Historical Society. All of those things are highly transportable and keep me connected to everything going on and the places that are the most important to me. So, and I definitely will probably hit Kansas Originals website to do some holiday shopping this year so I can avoid those supply chain issues and give Kansas. So,
Give Kansas. That's right. That's a great slogan. Give Kansas. We should
give
have a
Kansas.
banner. All right, folks, we've had a great day giving Kansas to you this morning. All the cool history and all the things to do, plus maybe not so warm and fuzzy wildlife segment. But other than that, it's been a great, great time. So until next time, I'm Deb Goodrich.
And I'm Michelle Martin.
And we will see you somewhere around Kansas.
Kansas.
Bye-bye.